be, but Sean, he quickly ascends, obviously, into the pro ranks. I mean, he literally has a handful of competitions under his belt when he turns professional, and he only competes for 2 years as a professional. Why does it seem, when you look back, that Mike Mentzer was around for a lot longer than 6 shows over a 2-year period?
You know, there's a couple of reasons. One is that the mystique of Mike Mentzer, I think, even transcends the man. You know, such was his personality that he could kind of engage people in that way, whether it was in person or through his writing that you mentioned in the Weider magazines. He was a very outgoing, very intelligent, and outspoken person. You know, he was a strong proponent of the philosophies of Ayn Rand. And he promoted Arthur Jones's H.I.T, so he had that going for him. But beyond that, he had an incredible physique, and Joe Weider recognized that and would put him in the magazines constantly from about 78 to 80, really hyping him as the next guy to replace Arnold as the premier bodybuilder.
You know, rewinding back to 76 now, a lot of people feel that was the year he really arrived. He won the IFBB's Mr. America title, and guys, that 76 Mr. America, that was one for the ages. There was a tall, a medium, and a short class. Mentzer wins the medium class. He actually defeated another popular bodybuilder named Roger Collard in that class. Danny Padilla was the short class winner, and then finishing second in the tall class was Mike's brother Ray. Sean, that 76 America title, that really got things going for Mike, didn't it?
Yeah, it totally did. You know, and maybe if for nothing else, the reason that Mike looked like a professional standing on stage with actually Danny also did those two guys looked like professionals standing on an amateur stage. I mean, they really, you know, they were both young at the time, but man, it was clear as day that these guys were going to be breakout stars in the IFBB.
Well, Sean, there's no question he was a fantastic amateur. I mean, he wins literally almost every show he goes into, and then even as a pro in that short duration, his record obviously is stellar, always up in that top 3, always in contention. My question to you is, had he been able to keep competing, for whatever reasons, we'll get into that some other time, how good could Mike Mentzer have been?
Man, I think the sky's the limit. I mean, I really, you know, he retired at 29, which we have to keep in perspective. You think about if a pro bodybuilder today has any success at 29, we herald him as this bright young star. Well, this guy was, you know, done at that age, and he had, like you said, through 79, he never took third, lower than third in a show, his debut year, and then in 80, he took that controversial fifth. Yeah, I just think Mike was a phenom, and if he could have held it together, and what I mean by that is, you know, we could get into later, his personality, if he could have stayed focused, yes, I think he could have won a slew of shows, maybe a slew of Olympias.
You know, he kept very busy in that 1979 rookie pro season. He competed in 5 events. He managed to win his pro debut, defeating Robbie Robinson to win that 1979 event down in Florida. He actually finished ahead of both Danny Padilla and Boyarko, a couple guys we're going to hear from in a few minutes. And then he capped the year, and I want to talk about this now, at the 79 Olympia. He was crowned the Olympia's heavyweight champion, and he had to face off against the great Frank Zane for the overall Olympia title. Sean, it was your classic and one of the original true apples versus oranges showdowns. Zane versus Mentzer, 79. Talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, get this. I mean, we talk about the 202 class today as a cutoff, and we consider the 202 guys to be short and small-ish. There was an over 200 and under 200. Mike was the over 200 winner, as you said. He stood about 5'8". He tipped the scales about 220 at that contest. Zane, inch taller than Mike, about 5'9". He was probably weighing in somewhere in the 190 range. I mean, it's kind of incredible. So yes, two very different physiques. And, you know, there's a lot to be said for the Zane physique. It was impeccable. You know, he wasn't blowing you away with muscle size, but with his definition, his lines, and his shape. And, you know, I think Mike accepted that defeat as a lesson, as an education. He took it to heart. And I know Peter McGough had written about this a few years back, that Mike did bear down for the 80 Olympia at that point. He said, I've got to get serious. I've got to get super conditioned the way Zane is, but I'm just going to be a bigger version of Zane.
Well, and let's keep on that for a second, Sean, because I think that was a pivotal moment in Mike's career and his choices as to where he was going from there. Now, let's keep in mind, Zane was on his third Olympia title, winning in 77, 78, and arguably a lot of people think 79 might have been his best year. And like Dan says, apples versus oranges. Mentzer, I don't think had any real shot of beating Zane. I think he was a very formidable opponent there, but you're right, kind of got outclassed in terms of just overall conditioning, which Zane was just the inventor of at that time. And he puts basically all his eggs into 1980. Does 79 set up the eventual fallout from 80?
I don't know if it sets up the fallout. It sets up, in a way it does, yes, because what it does is Mike becomes so singularly focused on 1980. You know, he took the defeat to heart, and like I said, he did take it as a chance to better himself. And he spent that next year putting himself through hell every minute of every day. You hear about guys prepping for 12 weeks, 16 weeks. No, Mike Mentzer prepped for 365 days with that kind of stress. And, when the results of 1980 were announced, that's what kind of set Mike on a different path from that point forward.
So let's keep in mind now as we take people back to this point. Mike sets out after 79. I firmly believe he thought he could beat Zane in 1980, along with the rest of the guys. A lot of these guys have traded wins back and forth, but Mike clearly was on his game, clearly focused, and had blinders on going to that show. But he never, nor did anybody, see Arnold entering.
No, not at all. Arnold was on no one's radar. He was retired. He was going into Hollywood. Everyone knew that. So, nevertheless, Mike was as confident as can be. He added about 5 pounds and probably lost a pound of fat and some water. So he was considerably better in 80 than he was 79, and he knew it. Plus, he knew that Zane had an accident about 4 months before the Olympia, a poolside accident of all things, and came into the Olympia light. So he said, well, Zane's not going to be a problem, and he basically thought he had a cakewalk, I believe.
It's and we're going to talk a little bit more about 80 when Boyer and Danny join us. There's few people that are more intimately familiar with those details than those guys, so that'll be interesting. But, it's not uncommon, Sean, for bodybuilders to be forgotten after they finished competing. But in Mentzer's case, he, of course, remained very popular, largely because, as you mentioned earlier, of his training philosophies. Very much a thinking man's bodybuilder. He popularized the high-intensity training concept that Arthur Jones had sort of brought to the forefront before him. Sean, you've been following the sport closely now for a long time. You've seen the changes. You've seen the Zane era and the Dorian Yates era. Talk about the game-changing impact that Mike had on the sport as a whole.
Well, he changed it in two very significant ways. One was with his physique, as I mentioned earlier. Bob and I got started at about the same time, and I was buying the magazines in 79, 80, and Mike's face and physique were plastered everywhere throughout the Weider magazines, and for good reason. He was compared to the Farnese Hercules, this famous statue, for his thickness, and he had a real kind of a masculine, like an alpha male type of physique, and it was very appealing. There was no bones about it. This guy trained hard, and that was the other area where he revolutionized the sport. He was the biggest proponent of HIT, the first man to really popularize this idea of high-intensity training, which was, as you mentioned, kind of Arthur Jones's baby. And all of a sudden it turned everything on its ear. Up until that point, all we knew was volume, like Arnold proposed. It was lots of sets, lots of reps. Just in the gym for 3 hours, 4 hours. Mike's like, you know what? There's another way to do it. You can get in and out of the gym in 45 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. It doesn't have to. And whether it was right or wrong, who knows? It does supposedly work for some people and not for others. But the point is that it opened people's minds up, and it gave them a revelation that there isn't just one way to do this, and Mike deserves all the credit in the world for that.
Jono, being that Arthur Jones at the time was kind of known generally as, I don't want to say a quack, but questionable in terms of what he brought to the table and some of his teachings, and he was kind of looked at as out there and certainly outside the box at that time. Being that Mike Mentzer was as good as he was in winning titles and a pro bodybuilder now, is it safe to say that Mike Mentzer legitimized Arthur Jones's HIT style?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I mean, what Arthur Jones needed was a mouthpiece like Mike Mentzer. As you mentioned, Arthur was probably even admittedly an eccentric man. He was known for his eccentricities, but Mike Mentzer was as legitimate as you could get in body.